Tonight, we are going to talk about the long, stoic slumber of history's most formidable warrior society for sleep. As you settle in and let the day's concerns drift away, we will journey together to a sun-drenched valley in ancient Greece, cradled by rugged mountains and a slow, winding river. We will walk beside figures of legend and lore, whose lives were not shaped by the pursuit of luxury or personal glory, but by a singular, unyielding discipline. We'll witness the forging of a unique people, from the whispered counsels of a mythic lawgiver to the quiet, constant dread that underpinned their society's fragile peace. We will hear the distant echoes of marching feet, the clatter of shield against shield, and the profound silence that followed their most defiant stand. This is not a tale of constant thunder, but of a deep, resonant hum of order, a society that dreamed not in gold, but in iron and bronze. So close your eyes and let the modern world fade, as we step back under the wide, star-strewn sky of Laconia to explore the rise, the reign, and the long, gentle fading of Sparta. Allow its story, with all its stark beauty and complex shadows, to carry you into a deeper, more restful state of mind. Chapter 1: The Mythic Beginnings, Sons of Heracles. Imagine a land of sharp, sun-bleached stone and whispering olive groves, cradled by forbidding mountains that carve a stark line against the sky. This is the valley of the Eurotas River, a slender ribbon of life winding through the heart of a harsh and beautiful country called Laconia. Here the story of Sparta does not begin with a date or a king's decree, but with a dream of divine destiny, a story whispered from generation to generation. The Spartans believed themselves to be the true heirs of the great hero Heracles, blessed by the gods with a strength and a right to this land that no other people could claim. Their origins were wrapped in the mist of legend, speaking of a long migration, a journey southward by a people known as the Dorians, who carried with them simple iron swords and an unshakable belief in their own superiority. They saw themselves not as mere settlers, but as conquerors fulfilling an ancient prophecy, returning to a home promised to their mythical ancestor. This founding myth was not just a tale for children, it was the very bedrock of their identity, a spiritual claim that justified every hardship and every conquest to come. As the stars wheeled above the dark silhouette of Mount Taygetus, these stories of heroic lineage wrapped the fledgling community in a cloak of invincible purpose. The early days in this rugged valley were not spent building magnificent temples or opulent palaces, as other Greeks might do, but in securing a foothold in a challenging landscape. The existing peoples of the land, those who had woven their lives into these hills for centuries, were either subdued, displaced, or forced into a reluctant coexistence with the new arrivals. The Spartans, ever practical and fierce, absorbed what they needed from the older cultures but always held themselves apart, a people apart by divine right. Their early villages were clusters of simple dwellings, their lives governed by the relentless rhythms of the seasons and the constant need to prove their worth in this new home. They listened to the wind in the gorges and heard the voice of oracles, seeking signs that their path was the correct one, that their sacrifices were seen and approved by the watching gods. There was a palpable sense of trial, of a people being tested by the very land they sought to claim, a feeling that only the strongest and most disciplined would endure. The quiet of the Laconian night, broken only by the call of night birds and the rustle of cypress trees, held within it the tense anticipation of a society waiting to be forged. From these humble, myth-steeped beginnings, the unique character of Sparta was already taking shape, hard and unyielding as the river stone. The figure who would give this raw, emerging society its lasting form existed in the hazy borderland between history and legend, a man known as Lycurgus. It was said he traveled far, to the shimmering coast of Asia Minor and the ancient sands of Egypt, observing the laws and customs of many peoples with a quiet, discerning eye. He listened to the whispers of the sea and the debates in foreign marketplaces, all the while pondering the problem of how to build a perfect, enduring community. Upon his return, he did not come bearing riches or strange trinkets, but with a mind full of ideas and a soul resolved to a great task. The stories say he went first to the sacred oracle at Delphi, to the smoky chamber where the priestess of Apollo breathed the fumes of the earth. There he received a revelation, a divine sanction that the laws he would bring to his people were not merely his own, but were inspired by the gods themselves. This divine mandate, this retra, would become the unchanging constitution, the immutable blueprint for everything that Sparta would become. With this sacred charge, Lycurgus returned to the Eurotas Valley, ready to sculpt the proud, disorganized descendants of Heracles into something entirely new, a single-minded organism of state. The society he envisioned was not one of individual glory or personal wealth, but of absolute equality among a privileged few, a brotherhood bound by law and iron discipline. He was said to have redistributed all the land of Laconia into equal plots, ensuring that no Spartan citizen would be distracted by the pursuit of luxury or envy his brother's portion. The very concept of gold and silver coinage, the lifeblood of other Greek cities, was banished, replaced with heavy, impractical iron bars to discourage trade and the corrupting influence of the outside world. Meals were to be taken not in private homes, but in communal mess halls, where every man, from king to common soldier, ate the same simple, sparse fare of black broth and coarse barley bread. This was not merely about nutrition, but about cementing bonds, about ensuring that the primary loyalty of every Spartan was to his messmates, and by extension, to the city itself. The family hearth was diminished, and the public hall was elevated, creating a society where the private self was gradually dissolved into the public whole. In the fading light of day, as men walked not to their own homes, but to their shared secession, the individual began to fade, and the legend of the collective started to solidify under the wide Laconian sky. Yet no lawgiver, no matter how wise or divinely inspired, could compel an entire people to abandon their old ways without first proving the necessity of his vision. The legends speak of Lycurgus, his great legal code finally established, making one final profound sacrifice to ensure its permanence. He summoned the people and made them swear a mighty oath that they would abide by his laws without change until he returned from another journey. Then he departed once more for Delphi to consult the oracle of final time. After receiving confirmation that his laws were good and would bring great fame to Sparta, he chose never to return. He voluntarily exiled himself, sending word back that the Spartans were now released from their oath, for he would not come home, thus binding them to his constitution for all eternity. In some tales he faded into the mountains, becoming one with the wild landscape he had shaped his people to master. In others, he died in a distant land, his mission complete. His absence was his final and greatest gift, for it made the laws eternal, unchanging, and bigger than any single man. The Spartans were left alone with their perfect system, a ship launched on the river of time without its shipwright, destined to sail forever on the course he had set. And so, from myth and purposeful design, the foundations were laid. The valley slept under a blanket of stars, the Eurotas river murmured its ancient song, and the people within it now had a singular path. They were no longer just Dorians or descendants of heroes, but something new, Spartiates. The word itself began to carry a weight, a promise of discipline and strength that set them apart in a fragmented Greek world. Their homes remained simple, their altars humble, for their devotion was not to be spent on adorning a city, but on adorning their own characters with endurance and courage. The mountains stood as silent sentinels, witnesses to this great social experiment, an experiment that sought to replace the chaos of human desire with the perfect order of a beehive. As dawn broke, painting the peaks of Taygetus in rosy gold, the first generation to truly live under the Lycurgan system awoke to a life of prescribed routines and shared purpose. The story of the warrior state had left the realm of legend and begun to breathe in the cool morning air. A living entity shaped from the dreams of a lawgiver and the stern stuff of the land itself. Chapter 2: The Conquered and the Conquerors, the Helots. Beneath the stark, proud image of Spartan equality lay a deep and troubling foundation, a human bedrock upon which the entire society rested. The Spartiates, the full citizen warriors, were a minority in their own land, a small island of privilege in a sea of subjugated people known as the Helots. These were not foreign slaves bought at market, but the original inhabitants of Laconia and the neighboring region of Messenia, peoples conquered in long-ago wars and bound to the soil forever. Every Spartan family plot, every kleros, was worked by Helot hands, their labor freeing the citizen from all worry of subsistence, all concern for harvest, so that his life could be dedicated solely to the art of war. The relationship was one of profound and permanent unease, a silent pact of fear and dependence that hummed through the valley like a held breath. The Helots grew the food, tended the flocks, and performed every menial task that sustained the Spartan machine, yet they lived without rights, without freedom, bound to the earth they tilled. Their presence was the dark, fertile soil from which the glittering spear point of Sparta grew, a constant reminder that this utopia of warriors was built upon a hidden world of servitude. The life of a Helot was one of invisible toil and visible subjugation, a existence dictated by the rhythms of the seasons and the demands of their Spartan masters. They lived in their own humble villages on the outskirts of the Spartan lands, allowed a semblance of family life and even a degree of economic autonomy, able to keep a portion of what they grew. This was not an act of kindness, but of cold practicality. A Helot with a stake in the harvest was more likely to ensure its success, and a healthy, reproducing Helot population meant a lasting labor force. Yet their days were long and their burdens heavy, spent under the watchful, often suspicious eyes of the citizens whose leisure they subsidized. They could be summoned for any duty, from carrying a warrior's armor on campaign to building a public road, their own needs always secondary to the state's. At any moment, a portion of their harvest could be demanded by the state, a tangible symbol of their conquered status. Their clothes were simple, a patchwork of rough materials, marking them instantly as separate from the crimson-cloaked Spartans. They were the ever-present shadows in the bright Laconian sunlight, a necessary and resented counterpoint to Spartan freedom. This resentment was a two-way current, for the Spartans lived with a deep, ingrained fear of the people they had subdued, a paranoia that shaped their laws and their very souls. They were outnumbered by a vast margin, and the knowledge that their comfortable existence depended on the compliance of a discontented multitude bred a perpetual state of low-grade anxiety. The Spartans referred to the Helots ominously as those who might be taken, a constant potential enemy within the gates. This fear was ritualized and institutionalized in a chilling practice known as the crypteia, a secret rite of passage for young Spartan men in their training. These youths would be sent out into the countryside with nothing but a dagger, instructed to hide by day and move by night, surviving off the land and by their wits. Their primary mission, however, was darker: to stalk and kill any Helot who showed signs of strength, leadership, or discontent, a brutal form of state terrorism designed to cull the herd and crush the spirit of rebellion before it could coalesce. The quiet of the Laconian night, therefore, held a different terror for the Helot in his village than it did for the Spartan in his barracks, a fear of the silent footfall and the sudden, sanctioned blade. Yet the relationship was not one of simple, unrelenting brutality. It was a complex, morbid symbiosis, a dance of dominance and dependence that required a grim form of cooperation. During the great festivals, Helots were sometimes forced to drink vast quantities of unmixed wine and then paraded through the public spaces, their drunken antics serving as a living lesson to Spartan youth on the evils of intemperance. In times of dire military need, the state would sometimes promise freedom to large numbers of Helots who would agree to fight in the phalanx, a dangerous but calculated gamble to tap into the strength of the subjugated. These freed Helots, however, never became Spartiates. They entered a twilight category of their own, a reminder that even reward was carefully measured and designed to preserve the fundamental hierarchy. The Spartans knew the Helots were not a monolith. Some were resigned, some were secretly seething, and a rare few might even feel a twisted sense of pride in their role in sustaining such a famous society. This complexity made them all the more unnerving, for an enemy you cannot understand is more frightening than one you can simply hate. The very land seemed to hold this tension, the fertile plains of Messenia feeling like a sleeping giant upon which the Spartan citadel uneasily perched. The psychological toll on the Spartan citizen was profound and deliberate, for the Helot system was the forge that tempered the famous Spartan vigilance and austerity. From childhood, a Spartan was taught to view the Helot with a mixture of contempt, suspicion, and pragmatic understanding. The comfort of his life, the time for his training, the very food in his bowl, came from their labor, a fact that could breed either guilt or a hardened sense of entitlement. To alleviate the former and enforce the latter, the system constantly reinforced the absolute gulf between the two groups. A Spartan boy was encouraged to bully and steal from Helots as part of his training, learning to exercise dominance without a second thought. This created a citizenry that was always on alert, always ready for violence, their famed discipline born not just from idealistic law, but from the palpable, everyday reality of living atop a powder keg. Their legendary brevity of speech, their laconic humor, can be seen as a trait refined in an environment where too much talk, especially with the wrong person, could be dangerous. Their entire culture became an exercise in collective self-preservation, a fortress mentality built not just against foreign enemies, but against the silent, numerous ones who worked their fields. As seasons turned and generations passed, the Helots became as much a part of the Spartan landscape as the river or the mountains, an eternal and troubling feature of the world. Their songs of loss and longing, sung softly in the fields at dusk, were a countermelody to the harsh military chants of the Spartans in their barracks. Their stories, their gods, their very identity persisted in a subterranean river of culture, flowing unseen beneath the rigid order imposed from above. The Spartans, for all their power, could never truly erase them, for to do so would be to destroy the foundation of their own way of life. So the two peoples existed in a tense, eternal embrace, bound together by history, violence, and necessity. The peace of the Spartan afternoon, the citizen resting after his exercises, was a peace purchased and maintained by an unseen war, a cold war fought in the hearts and minds of an entire subjugated population. And when the winds blew down from the mountains, they carried not just the scent of pine and earth, but the heavy, complicated silence of a land holding its breath, a society forever balanced on the edge of its own making, its strength and its greatest vulnerability one and the same. Chapter 3: The Lawgiver's Whisper, Lycurgus, and the Great Retra. The story of Sparta is inseparable from the whisper of one man, a figure who moved through the early history of the city not with the clamor of a conqueror, but with the quiet certainty of a master architect. Lycurgus, they said, was born of royal blood but possessed a soul that cared little for the petty power of a single throne. He witnessed the tumult and inequality in the fledgling Spartan society, the discord that threatened to tear the people apart before they had even solidified into a true nation. It is said he undertook a profound journey, not of conquest, but of contemplation, leaving the rocky shores of Greece to wander the ancient world. He walked the bustling ports of Ionia, where merchants haggled over silks and spices, and he traveled to the timeless land of Egypt, where priests measured the heavens and pharaohs ruled as living gods. In every place, he observed not with the eye of a tourist, but with the deep, analytical gaze of a seeker, collecting fragments of wisdom, noting what brought societies strength and what led them to corruption and ruin. His travels complete. Lycurgus returned to Sparta not with chests of treasure, but with a mind full of revolutionary ideas, a blueprint for a society unlike any other. Yet he knew that mere human wisdom would not be enough to persuade his proud, stubborn people to upend their entire way of life. So he turned to the highest authority they recognized, the divine. He made the long pilgrimage to Delphi, to the navel of the world, where the sacred Pythia, breathing the intoxicating vapors from a cleft in the earth, spoke for the god Apollo. In the dim, smoky sanctum of the temple, he posed his question, and the oracle's reply was thunderous in its clarity. The words declared that the laws Lycurgus would bring were dear to the gods, and that Sparta would achieve supreme fame and fortune by following them. This was the Retra, the divine oracle and covenant, which lent his reforms an aura of sacred, unassailable truth. He returned from the mountain not as a mere politician, but as a prophet with a mandate from the gods themselves, and the people in awe listened. Armed with this divine sanction, Lycurgus began his great work, dismantling the old structures of society with a calm, methodical purpose. His first and most radical act was said to be the redistribution of all the land in Laconia into equal, inalienable plots or kleroi for each Spartan citizen. This struck at the root of wealth inequality, ensuring that no citizen could become vastly richer than another through land ownership, and that every Spartan had the same economic stake in the city's survival. Next, he famously demonetized the economy, banning the use of gold and silver coinage, which he saw as engines of greed and foreign influence. In their place, he introduced currency of heavy, unwieldy iron bars, dipped in vinegar to make them brittle and worthless for anything but Spartan transactions. This made hoarding wealth impractical and actively discouraged trade with the outside world, fostering a stark self-sufficiency and turning Spartan society inward, focusing its energy on itself rather than on foreign luxuries and ideas. Perhaps his most profound innovation was the creation of the syssitia, the common messes, where every Spartan citizen was required to take his evening meal. This was not a casual dinner club, but a fundamental pillar of the state, designed to break down family loyalties and forge a stronger bond of brotherhood among the warriors. In these austere halls, kings and commoners sat side by side on simple benches, eating the same meager fare, the infamous black broth of pork, blood and vinegar, and a coarse barley bread. Conversation was encouraged, but frivolity and drunkenness were despised. Each man had to contribute a fixed monthly amount of barley, wine, cheese, and figs from his plot to the common pot, and failure to do so meant loss of citizenship. This system served as a daily leveler, a constant reminder that they were all equal under the law, and it turned the military unit into a true band of brothers who shared every hardship. The private home became merely a place for sleep and procreation. The true heart of a Spartan's life beat in the communal mess hall. Lycurgus did not stop at economics and dining. He reshaped the very political body of the state, creating a mixed government designed to balance power and prevent tyranny. He maintained the two traditional kings, not as absolute monarchs, but as hereditary military and religious figureheads, two anchors of stability. To advise them and manage daily affairs, he established the Gerousia, a council of 28 elders, men over 60 elected for life for their wisdom and virtue. This council would draft laws and proposals. Then came the Apella, the assembly of all full Spartan citizens over 30, who had the power to vote on the proposals from the Gerousia, not with debate, but with a simple shout of approval or disapproval. And finally, to oversee it all, he created the unique office of the Ephors, 5 men elected annually from all the people, with the power to summon assemblies, negotiate with foreign states, and even censure the kings. It was a complex, interlocking system of checks and balances, a political machine designed for stability above all else, to ensure that no single man, no single faction, could ever seize control and undo the Lycurgan order. His life's work complete, Lycurgus faced his final and most ingenious task, ensuring his creation would outlive him. He gathered the people and made them swear a solemn, unbreakable oath that they would abide by his laws without alteration until he returned from another journey to Delphi. Once they swore, he departed, seeking a final blessing from the oracle. The Pythia confirmed once more that Sparta would be glorious as long as it kept to his constitution. Having received this final assurance, Lycurgus made his ultimate sacrifice for the city he loved. He chose never to return. He sent a message releasing the Spartans from their oath, for he would remain in perpetual exile, or as some stories claim, he chose to starve himself to death, removing his own mortal influence forever. By vanishing, he made himself a legend and his laws immortal. They could not be changed, for the lawgiver was gone. They were a perfect closed system, a divine gift frozen in time. And so, the whisper of Lycurgus became the eternal, unchanging voice of Sparta itself, a voice that would guide, constrain, and define every Spartan life for centuries to come, long after his footsteps had faded from the dusty roads of the world. Chapter 4: The Agoge, a Childhood of Discipline. The true heart of the Spartan system, the furnace where the raw material of a boy was melted down and recast into the unyielding iron of a warrior, was the agoge. This state-controlled education and training regimen began not at the age of reason, but at the moment of birth, under the cold, assessing gaze of the city's elders. Shortly after a Spartan boy drew his first breath, he was brought not to a cradle adorned with gifts, but before a committee of the Gerousia. They examined him for any sign of weakness, deformity, or lack of vigor, for the city had no room for anything but strength. If the infant was deemed unfit, he was exposed on the wild slopes of Mount Taygetus, a brutal, pragmatic form of selection that treated human life as a resource for the state. This first, harsh lesson was one the child would never remember, but it set the tone for everything to come. Belonging to Sparta was not a right, but a privilege earned by physical perfection and unyielding endurance. At the tender age of 7, a Spartan boy's childhood, as the outside world understood it, came to an abrupt and permanent end. He was taken from his mother's arms, from the warmth and safety of his home, and brought to a communal barracks to begin his life in the agoge. The separation was total and designed to be traumatic, severing the primary bond of family and transferring all loyalty to the state, and to his new brothers in training, his agelai, or herd. He was issued a single rough tunic, intended to be worn year-round, summer's heat and winter's chill alike, to teach him to endure discomfort without complaint. His hair was cut short, his bedding was a simple mat of reeds he would have to gather himself from the banks of the Eurotas. From this day forward, his needs for food, shelter, and discipline would be provided not by a family, but by the system and by his own increasingly cunning and hardened wits. Life within the agoge was a carefully orchestrated symphony of deprivation and challenge, all designed to forge resilience, obedience, and cunning. The boys were deliberately underfed, not out of cruelty, but to force them to learn the art of supplementing their rations by stealing food. This was not considered dishonorable, it was a vital skill. However, if a boy was caught in the act, the punishment was not for stealing, but for being caught for a lack of stealth and skill. He would be whipped not to deter theft, but to encourage better technique. They slept in crowded, austere dormitories, competing with one another in endurance games, wrestling in muddy pits, and undergoing relentless physical drills to harden their bodies into perfect instruments. Academic education was minimal, focused only on what was practical. The ability to read and write just enough to understand orders, and to memorize the poetry of the warrior poet Tyrtaeus, whose verses glorified death in battle over a life of shame. Their teachers were not gentle pedagogues, but hardened veterans who believed that pain was the best instructor. As the boys grew into their teenage years, the challenges escalated in both intensity and psychological complexity. They were encouraged to fight amongst themselves, with older boys acting as mentors and enforcers, creating a hierarchy based on strength and toughness. Public beatings were common. Sometimes as punishment, sometimes as a test to see who could endure the most pain without crying out. The most promising youths were selected for a more sinister and formative role, participation in the Crypteia. This was a secret service, a rite of passage that plunged them into the darkest aspect of Spartan society. Armed only with a dagger, they were sent into the Helot lands, told to hide by day and move by night, living off the land. Their mission was to surveil, intimidate, and if necessary, assassinate any Helot who appeared too strong, too proud, or too potentially rebellious. This practice was a brutal lesson in statecraft, teaching them to view the subjugated population not as people, but as a problem to be managed with cold, ruthless efficiency, hardening their hearts and binding them to the state's most terrible secrets. Despite its harshness, the agoge was not devoid of moments that fostered a fierce, proud camaraderie. The boys in an age like 8 slept, trained, and suffered together, forming bonds that were often stronger than those of blood. They were taught to value the success of the group over the glory of the individual. To win in a competition was good, but to win as a team was the Spartan ideal. They learned the arts of war together, how to wield the spear and shield in perfect unison, how to march in flawless formation, how to raise their voices as one in the terrifying war songs that would precede battle. There were festivals and ritual contests, like the grueling game of Platonistas, a free-for-all brawl on an island in the river, where the goal was to throw every member of the opposing team into the water. In these moments, the relentless pressure created a diamond-hard esprit de corps, a sense of belonging to an elite fraternity that had survived a trial by fire that no other Greek could comprehend. They were the survivors, the chosen, the future backbone of the phalanx. At around the age of 20, if he had survived and thrived, a young man would graduate from the agoge, but he did not yet become a full citizen. He entered a 10-year period of compulsory military service, living full-time in the barracks with his comrades. He could marry but could only visit his wife secretly, by night, reinforcing that his primary home was still the military community. Only at age 30, having successfully navigated every hurdle of the agoge and a decade of active service, was a Spartan man finally considered a full Spartiate, a peer, a homos. He gained the right to vote in the assembly, to dine in his sicyon, and to live in his own home. The product of this 23-year process was not merely a soldier, but a specific type of man, laconic in speech, unwavering in courage, physically formidable and psychologically molded to place the state above all else, family, personal desire, even his own life. As he took his place in the phalanx, the echo of his childhood, the hunger, the cold, the whispered lessons of the crypteia, remained with him, the invisible foundation of the formidable Spartan warrior the world would come to fear. Chapter 5: The Constant Companion, the Shield. For a Spartan warrior, his identity was not held in his heart or his mind alone, but was physically manifest in an object of wood, bronze and leather, his shield, the hoplon. This was not merely a piece of defensive equipment, it was the central artifact of his existence, a symbolic burden and a sacred trust. The shield was large, nearly 3 feet in diameter, convex in shape and brutally heavy, weighing upwards of 30 pounds. It was constructed from layered wood, faced with a thin sheet of bronze, and carried by a unique double grip, an armband in the center for the forearm and a hand grip at the rim. This design meant the shield was not held aloft by strength alone, but was worn, becoming an extension of the body itself. Its weight was a constant teacher, a reminder of the burden of citizenship, of the collective weight of the entire phalanx that rested on the left arm of every man. From the first time a boy in the agoge hefted a practice version, he learned that this object would define him. The shield's primary purpose was not to protect the individual who carried it, but to protect the man to his left. In the tight interlocking formation of the phalanx, each soldier's shield covered his own left side and, crucially, the unprotected right side of the comrade next to him. A Spartan's own right side was protected by the shield of the man to his right. This created a wall of overlapping bronze and wood, a literal manifestation of their interdependence. To break rank, to drop one's shield, or to step back was not just a personal failure. It was a betrayal that exposed one's brother to death and could unravel the entire formation. The safety of the unit depended entirely on each man holding his ground and maintaining his place in the line. Thus, the shield became the physical expression of the Spartan ideal. The individual was nothing, the community was everything. Its value was social, not personal. It existed for the man beside you. This profound symbolism was drilled into every Spartan from childhood through a well-known, laconic phrase uttered by Spartan mothers and wives to their sons and husbands departing for war. As they handed the warrior his shield, they would say simply, "Etan e epitas," with it or on it. The meaning was stark and unforgettable: return victorious with your shield held high, or return dead, carried upon it as a stretcher. To abandon the heavy shield in retreat to save oneself was the ultimate act of cowardice, a shame so deep it was unforgivable. A man who lost his shield in battle might survive, but he would lose something far greater: his honor, his citizenship, and the respect of every Spartan, including his own family. The shield, therefore, was more important than the spear or the sword, more important than life itself. It was the tangible measure of a man's worth, the proof of his fidelity to the only thing that truly mattered, the brothers who stood with him in the line. The care and appearance of the shield were also matters of deep significance and personal pride. While the state may have provided the basic equipment, a Spartan often maintained and adorned his own shield, the one item where a small degree of individual expression was permitted. The bronze face was kept polished to a brilliant sheen, not for vanity, but to flash intimidatingly in the sun as the phalanx advanced. Many would paint a symbol on the front, the most famous being the lambda, for Lacedaemon, the official name of the Spartan state. This transformed the sea of shields into a unified, terrifying banner. Others might choose a personal or family emblem: a serpent, a bird of prey, a gorgon's head, a single flash of identity on the field of anonymity. Before battle, men would carefully check the leather straps, tighten the grips, and run a cloth over the bronze, a quiet, ritualistic preparation that was as much a meditation on duty as it was a practical task. In these moments, the shield was a companion, a confessor, the only thing that stood between order and chaos. In the quiet times in the barracks or at the sicyon, the shield rested against the wall, a silent, ever-present witness. It was there during debates, during meals, during the long nights of storytelling. It absorbed the smoke of the hearth and the echoes of laughter. It became part of the landscape of a Spartan's life, so ubiquitous that its absence would feel like the loss of a limb. When a warrior grew old and retired from the front lines, he did not discard his shield. He might hang it in a place of honor in his home, or pass it down to his son, the metal scarred from impacts, the leather worn smooth by a lifetime of grip. These marks were not flaws, they were a history, a narrative of battles survived and a trust upheld. The shield outlived the man, becoming a relic, a testament to a life lived in service to an idea greater than oneself. It was a simple object, but it carried the weight of a civilization. And so, when the Spartan phalanx marched, what advanced was not merely an army of men, but a single, breathing entity of wood and bronze and flesh. The synchronized tramp of their feet was the heartbeat, the forest of spear points was the bristling hair, and the unbroken wall of shields was the impenetrable hide. The clatter as shields knocked together, the deafening shout that went up just before the crash of battle, the relentless push of the press, all of this was orchestrated around the constant, central presence of the hoplon. In the dust and terror of combat, a Spartan's world narrowed to the few feet in front of his shield, to the face of the enemy over its rim, and to the feel of his comrade's shoulder pressing against his own from behind. The shield was his small piece of the wall, his fragment of the Spartan dream of order. And as long as every man held his fragment firm, the wall held, the dream endured, and the legend of the shield, the protector of the man who had none, lived on. Chapter 6: The Unseen Power, Spartan Women. While the men of Sparta spent their lives in the barracks and on the training grounds, a different kind of strength was being cultivated in the sunlit courtyards and modest homes of the city. Spartan women, unlike their secluded and disenfranchised sisters in Athens and other Greek states, lived in a world of surprising autonomy and formidable expectation. They were not hidden away in shadowy women's quarters. They were visible, vocal, and vital to the Spartan project. From birth, a Spartan girl was valued not for a future dowry, but for her potential to become the mother of strong warriors. Her upbringing, while separate from the boys' agoge, was uniquely rigorous for the ancient world. She was fed well, encouraged to participate in athletics, running, wrestling, throwing the javelin and discus, all to ensure she developed a strong, healthy body capable of bearing robust children. In the gymnasiums and during religious festivals like the Gymnopedia, they competed and exercised, often in minimal dress, their physical prowess on display as a point of civic pride. This physical culture fostered a renowned sense of confidence and a sharp, often intimidating, wit. Spartan women were educated enough to manage estates, for they would frequently be the sole administrators of household and land while their husbands were away on campaign, sometimes for years. They learned to read, to calculate, and to supervise the Helot laborers, tasks that required practical intelligence and firm authority. This responsibility bred a formidable character, a woman who was neither delicate nor demure, but assertive and direct. Their famous laconic speech was just as pointed as the men's. Stories abound of their bluntness, a mother handing her son his shield with the iconic phrase, a wife asked by her husband to ensure his cloak was not cowardly in battle, replying, "If it does not save you, it will cover you in death." They were the guardians of Spartan values on the home front, the enforcers of a code that prized honor above all else, even above the safe return of a loved one. Marriage for a Spartan woman was less a romantic union and more a state-sanctioned duty to produce fit citizens. Weddings were stripped of sentimental ceremony. The bride had her hair cropped short and was dressed in a man's cloak and sandals. She was then, in a ritual of capture, carried off by her groom to his barracks, where a secret, brief visit would initiate the marriage. Afterwards, the husband would continue to live with his messmates, visiting his wife only by stealth for years, a practice designed to heighten desire and, they believed, produce stronger offspring. This arrangement granted women a significant degree of independence within the marriage. They were not under the constant scrutiny of a husband, and they held considerable sway over property, as their dowries often consisted of land. A Spartan woman could, and did, own and inherit land in her own right, a legal right almost unthinkable elsewhere in Greece, making her an economic force within the society. Their primary civic duty, repeated to them constantly, was to be mothers of Spartans. This was not a passive role, but an active, demanding, and honored one. They were expected to be stoic in the face of loss. The greatest glory was to have sons die bravely for Sparta. The oft-told story, perhaps apocryphal but emblematic, is of the mother who, upon learning all 5 of her sons had been killed in battle, simply asked, "Did Sparta win?" Her concern was for the collective, not the individual. This emotional discipline was seen as the female counterpart to the male courage on the battlefield. They raised their sons with a stern love, preparing them mentally for the agoge, and they shamed their husbands and brothers into bravery with their unwavering expectations. In a society obsessed with martial virtue, the women were the high priests of that virtue, the keepers of the flame, ensuring that no generation grew soft or forgot what was demanded of them. Because they managed property and were often the de facto heads of household for long periods, Spartan women also wielded indirect but substantial economic and social influence. As heiresses, they could control vast tracts of land, and over centuries, through inheritance laws skewed by constant warfare and male attrition, a surprising amount of Sparta's territory came into the hands of women. This concentration of wealth was, in fact, one of the unseen cracks in the Lycurgan system, as it created inequality that the lawgiver had tried to eliminate. Their opinions mattered in the community, they were known to voice their thoughts on political matters, and their collective judgment could shape the reputation of a man or a family. While they held no formal political office, their power was real, exercised through the domestic sphere, through the raising of future citizens, and through the formidable force of their shared societal expectations. Thus, the women of Sparta existed in a unique space, both constrained by a hypermartial culture and liberated by it in unexpected ways. They were not warriors, but they were forged in the same relentless ideal. They did not stand in the phalanx, but they were the reason it stood. Their strength was of a different kind, a strength of body, of mind, of unwavering will. They walked with a straight back, spoke with a direct tongue, and looked upon the world with the calm, assessing eyes of those who bear the ultimate responsibility, the creation and preservation of a people. In the soft light of a Laconian evening, as the men trained or dined communally, the sounds from the homes were not of idle chatter, but of management, of instruction, of a quiet, steely resolve. The Spartan woman in her simple peplos, her hair perhaps touched with grey, was the unseen pillar, the silent, formidable power upon which the famous warrior society, in all its brutal glory, ultimately rested. Chapter 7: The Hot Gates, Thermopylae. In the high summer of 480 BC, a shadow fell across Greece, a shadow cast by the vast, multi-nation army of Xerxes, the king of kings of Persia, who sought to absorb the stubborn Greek city-states into his sprawling empire. As this immense force, said to number in the millions, marched south, terror preceded it, and many Greek cities chose submission over hopeless resistance. But Sparta, ever deliberate, was observing the sacred festival of the Carneia, during which warfare was forbidden. Yet the threat was too grave to ignore entirely. The Spartan assembly, along with their allies, decided to make a stand at a place of profound strategic and symbolic power, the pass of Thermopylae, the Hot Gates, named for its nearby sulfur springs. Here the mountains tumbled steeply into the sea, leaving only a narrow track perhaps 50 feet wide, a place where a few could hold back the many. King Leonidas, a descendant of Heracles, was chosen to lead a small advance force of 300 Spartiates, not as the full army, but as the vanguard, the spearpoint of a larger Greek coalition. Leonidas did not choose his 300 lightly. He selected only men who had living sons, ensuring that their family lines and their warrior spirit would not die with them should they fall. This was not a suicide mission, but a calculated delay, a holding action to buy time for the main Greek armies to mobilize and for the powerful Athenian fleet to engage the Persians at sea. As they marched north, their polished shields gleaming, they were joined by several thousand allies from other Greek cities, including brave Thespians and Thebans. When they arrived at Thermopylae, they set about repairing an old wall that spanned the narrowest part of the pass, a choke point where their superior armor and discipline would be most effective. They made camp, they exercised, and they waited, a small band of bronze and scarlet against the coming storm, the salt spray from the Malian Gulf cooling their skin under the blazing sun. The Persian host arrived, filling the coastal plain to the north like a living, shimmering carpet, their numbers so great the sound of their movement was like distant thunder. Xerxes, confident in his overwhelming force, waited 4 days, expecting the Greeks to flee in panic at the sight of his majesty. When they did not, he grew impatient and ordered his first waves of infantry to clear the pass. What followed was not a battle of maneuver, but a brutal, grinding slaughter in a confined space. The Greeks, fighting in shifts, used the narrow terrain perfectly. The Spartans, at the forefront, employed their phalanx with lethal efficiency. As the Persians pushed forward, they found themselves funneled into a space where their numbers meant nothing. The longer Persian spears could not find purchase against the wall of overlapping shields, while the shorter, stouter Greek spears thrust over and under the shield wall with deadly precision. For 2 days, the tide of the east broke against the rock of the west, the pass littered with Persian dead. On the 3rd day, everything changed. A local traitor, a man named Ephialtes, revealed to Xerxes a hidden mountain path that led behind the Greek position. When scouts reported that the Persians were moving to surround them, Leonidas faced the grim reality. He dismissed the bulk of the allied forces, saving them for the fights to come. But he, his 300 Spartans, and a devoted contingent of about 700 Thespians and 400 Thebans chose to stay. This was no longer tactical delay, it was a deliberate sacrifice, a choice to sell their lives as dearly as possible to inspire all of Greece. They moved forward from the repaired wall to a wider part of the pass, knowing it would be their last stand. That morning they prepared not with solemn ritual, but with a calm, almost routine determination. Leonidas is said to have told his men to eat a good breakfast, for they would dine in Hades. The final battle was a chaotic, brutal melee, a departure from the ordered phalanx fighting of the previous days. Surrounded, the Greeks fought back-to-back in a shrinking circle. They used their spears until they shattered, then drew their short swords, and when those were lost, they fought with their hands and teeth. Leonidas fell, and a ferocious struggle erupted over his body. The Spartans drove the Persians back 4 times to retrieve it. The air grew thick with dust and the metallic scent of blood, the cries of men mingling with the clatter of weapons on shields. They fought until their weapons were broken and their strength was spent. Finally, a rain of Persian arrows, launched from a safe distance, darkened the sky and fell upon the last defiant survivors, cutting them down where they stood. The hot gates fell silent, the only sounds the sigh of the wind through the pass and the gentle lap of the waves against the shore. Yet in their fall they achieved a victory far greater than any they could have won by living. They had shown that Persian numbers were not invincible, that courage and discipline could defy an empire. The story of their stand, of Leonidas's defiance when Xerxes demanded their weapons, "Come and take them," rippled through Greece like a galvanizing shock. The stone lion later erected on the site marked their sacrifice, but their true monument was the spirit they ignited. The Athenian fleet, emboldened, would soon defeat the Persians at Salamis. The following year, a united Greek army, with Spartans at its core, would crush the Persian land forces at Plataea. The sacrifice at Thermopylae had bought more than time. It had forged a legend of resistance that would define Western history. And as the sun set over the narrow pass, painting the stones in hues of blood and gold, the whisper of the wind seemed to carry the echo of their epitaph, written for all time. "Go, stranger, and tell Sparta that here we lie, obedient to her words." Chapter 8: The Slow Rust, Empire and Decline. The stunning victory over the Persian Empire at Plataea in 479 BC left Sparta not just victorious, but elevated to the undisputed leader of the Greek world. They stood atop the pinnacle of military prestige, their way of life vindicated by history itself. Yet this moment of supreme triumph contained the seeds of their own unraveling. Sparta was a society designed for isolation and internal discipline, not for managing a fragile, contentious alliance of sovereign states known as the Delian League, which soon fell under Athenian control. Sparta formed its own Peloponnesian League, but leadership required diplomacy, flexibility, and engagement with the outside world, all things the Lycurgan system discouraged. The frugal, inward-looking Spartans found themselves navigating the complex, money-driven politics of other Greek cities, a world for which they were profoundly unsuited. The very austerity that made them invincible on the battlefield made them clumsy and suspicious in the councils of power. The corrosive agent that began to eat at the iron of Sparta was, ironically, the fruit of their own victories, foreign wealth and imperial ambition. For generations, Lycurgus's iron bars had prevented the accumulation of movable riches, but now gold and silver flowed into the city as tribute from allies and spoils from war. This wealth could not be evenly distributed without breaking the system, so it flowed into the hands of a few, particularly the kings, generals, and those who governed abroad. For the first time, visible inequality began to appear among the Spartiates. A man like the general Lysander, who commanded the final victorious fleet against Athens, returned with vast sums, upsetting the delicate economic balance of equality that was the bedrock of the system. A new class of wealthy Spartans emerged, who could contribute more to their succession, gaining influence, and who began to desire the luxuries they saw in Athens and other prosperous cities. The ancient, leveling restraint was slowly, imperceptibly, being eroded by the temptations of power and possession. This internal decay was mirrored by a slow demographic crisis that struck at the heart of Spartan military strength. A shrinking population of full citizens, the Spartiates. The reasons were manifold. The relentless demands of the agoge and the constant warfare weeded out many. The strict inheritance laws, designed to keep plots of land intact, meant that if a family had no male heir, its land and the Helots that worked it might pass to a daughter, consolidating wealth and reducing the number of men who could meet the property qualification for citizenship. Most devastatingly, a massive earthquake in 464 BC struck Sparta, killing a generation of young warriors in their barracks and triggering a major Helot revolt that took years to suppress. Each crisis thinned the ranks of the peerless warriors. Where once there had been 8,000 Spartiates, by the late 4th century BC, that number had dwindled to perhaps 1,000 or fewer. The core of the phalanx was hollowing out, leaving the state increasingly dependent on reluctant allies and mercenaries. The long, grinding conflict with Athens, the Peloponnesian War, which Sparta ultimately won in 404 BC, was the pinnacle of their power and the accelerant of their decline. Victory placed Sparta in control of an Aegean empire, forcing them to maintain navies, garrison distant cities, and play the role of hegemon. This stretched their institutions and their human resources to the breaking point. Spartan harmosts, or governors, sent to rule subject cities, often behaved with arrogance and cruelty, earning hatred rather than loyalty. The influx of even more wealth further distorted their society. Meanwhile, back home, the old virtues were fading. Men found ways to evade the agoge. Some could no longer afford the compulsory contributions to the succession and lost their citizenship. The iron laws of Lycurgus, which required a homogeneous, disciplined body of peers, were buckling under the weight of success. The society that had been forged in disciplined poverty was rusting in the damp air of unaccustomed empire. A telling symbol of this decline was the fate of the royal families and the rise of corruption. Kings like Agesilaus II, though a capable commander, spent decades on foreign campaigns, immersed in the politics of Persia and the Greek East, their perspectives changed by long exposure to the outside world. The once sacred office of the ephors became a tool for political factions, and some were even bribed by foreign gold. The ideal of homoi, the equals, was now a cruel joke, as a small, ultra-wealthy elite controlled most of the land and power, while many born Spartans sank into poverty, becoming inferiors with no voice in the state. The once unbreakable bond between citizens was fraying, replaced by suspicion and class resentment. The quiet, orderly streets of Sparta now murmured with discontent, and the communal meals in the Syssosha were shadowed by the knowledge that the men eating together were no longer truly equal. The machine was breaking down from within, its gears gummed by gold and its springs weakened by discord. And so Sparta entered the 4th century BC not as the invincible fortress of legend, but as a weary, conflicted power, struggling to maintain its facade. It still possessed formidable warriors, and its name still struck fear, but the inner fire was dimming. The world around it was changing, with new military tactics and political ideas emerging, but Sparta remained bound to the immutable retra of Lycurgus, unable to adapt. It clung to its past glory like a relic, even as the foundations of that glory crumbled beneath it. The mountains still stood guard, and the Eurotas still flowed, but the society they cradled was no longer the perfect, closed system of the lawgiver's dream. It had tasted the fruit of the outside world, and that taste, both sweet and bitter, had initiated a slow, irreversible metamorphosis from an insular discipline to a hollow imitation of its former self, waiting for a shock that would reveal how deep the rust had truly gone. Chapter 9: The Fallen King, Leuctra and the Shattered Myths. For over 2 centuries, the Spartan phalanx had been the undisputed master of the land battle, a truth so universally accepted it had become a law of nature in the Greek world. No enemy line had ever withstood its slow, grinding, terrifying advance. This myth of invincibility was the ultimate weapon, often causing foes to break before the first spear was even thrown. But in the summer of 371 BC, on a flat plain near the small Boeotian city of Leuctra, that myth met a general who did not believe in myths. Thebes, long a subordinate ally in Sparta's Peloponnesian League, had risen under the leadership of the brilliant and innovative Epaminondas. He had studied the Spartan way of war and had found its weakness. It was predictable, rigid, and reliant on the deep, uniform strength of its right wing, where the king and the elite warriors always stood. Epaminondas decided not to match this strength, but to overwhelm it with a daring, unprecedented concentration of force. The Spartan army, led by King Cleombrotus, marched onto the plain of Leuctra confident of another victory. They outnumbered the Thebans and their allies, and they were Spartans that had always been enough. They arrayed themselves in the traditional, time-honored formation, the phalanx 12 men deep, with the best troops and the king on the right. Epaminondas, however, arranged his forces in a radical new way. Instead of mirroring the Spartan line, he placed his own best troops, the legendary sacred band of Thebes, on his left wing, directly opposite Cleombrotus and the Spartan elite. Then he made this left wing not 12 but a staggering 50 men deep, a massive, concentrated column of shock troops. His center and right were shallower and were ordered to advance slowly or even hold back, a concept that defied all conventional Greek tactics. He was staking everything on a single, thunderous blow from his strengthened left against the Spartan heart. When the battle began, the unusual Theban formation must have seemed bizarre, even foolish to the seasoned Spartan commanders. The two lines advanced, the air filling with the deep-throated paean, the war chant. As they closed, the Theban left, a solid, dense column of shields and spears tipped with a razor edge of the sacred band, drove forward with singular purpose. Epaminondas himself led them, not from behind, but in the front rank. The deep column acted like a battering ram, striking the Spartan right with colossal, focused force. The traditional phalanx, designed for even pressure across the line, could not withstand this localized, overwhelming weight. The Spartan right, the place of honor, began to buckle under the impact. In the fierce, bloody press of the Othismos, the shield-to-shield shoving match, depth and momentum were everything, and on this day the Thebans had more of both. Then came the moment that shattered a world. King Cleombrotus, fighting valiantly in the front rank of his buckling wing, was struck down and killed. The sight of their king falling was a psychic blow the Spartans had never before endured on the battlefield. The deep column of Thebans, sensing the rupture, pressed their advantage with furious intensity. The Spartan right collapsed, and with it, the entire formation unraveled. Panic and emotion the disciplined Spartans were supposed to be immune to, spread through their ranks for the first time in living memory. The unthinkable was happening. Spartans were turning their backs, were running, were being cut down as they fled. The myth of invincibility evaporated in the Boeotian dust, replaced by the raw, shocking reality of a crushing, total defeat. Over 1,000 Lacedaemonians lay dead on the field, including 400 of the precious, dwindling Spartiates. The news of Leuctra traveled through Greece like a lightning strike, leaving awe and disbelief in its wake. Cities that had lived in the shadow of Spartan hegemony for generations could scarcely believe the reports. The equilibrium of power, which had rested on the unshakable premise of Spartan military supremacy, was instantly and permanently overturned. More importantly, the defeat broke something intangible but vital within Sparta itself. The psychological bedrock of their society, the certainty of their own superiority in battle, was gone. The pain of the lost men was immense, but the death of the myth was a wound that would never truly heal. For the first time, Spartans had to confront the possibility that their way was not the only way, that their discipline could be bested by cleverness and innovation, that they were, after all, merely mortal. In the years that followed, Epaminondas delivered the coup de grace to Spartan power. He marched his army unopposed into the very heart of Laconia, a sight no enemy army had beheld for centuries. He did not assault the city of Sparta itself, but he did something far more damaging. He freed the Helots of Messenia, the foundation of the Spartan economy, and helped them re-establish their own independent city-state. With a single stroke, he stripped Sparta of half its territory and most of its slave labor. The Spartan state, already reeling from Leuctra, was now crippled economically and strategically. It shrank back to its original core in Laconia, a regional power rather than a pan-Hellenic leader. The fallen king on the field of Leuctra was a symbol for the fallen city, proud, broken, and lying amidst the ruins of its own legend, a legend that the world now knew could be broken. Chapter 10: The Fading Echo, Sparta in a Changed World. The centuries that followed the disaster at Leuctra were a long, slow twilight for Sparta, a gradual diminishment from a feared military power to a curious relic of a bygone age. No longer able to project force beyond its shrunken borders in Laconia, the city turned inward, consumed by a bitter, nostalgic conservatism. Later kings like Arges IV and Cleomenes III in the 3rd century BC recognized the decay, the plummeting citizen numbers, the gross inequality of land ownership, and attempted bold reforms to revive the Lycurgan system. They proposed cancelling debts, redistributing land, and reinvigorating the agoge, dreaming of a return to the ancient ways of discipline and equality. But the society had changed too much. The wealthy oligarchs who now controlled Sparta's remnants fiercely resisted any threat to their possessions. The reformist kings met with mixed success and ultimate failure, their efforts revealing not the strength of the old laws, but the impossibility of resurrecting them in a world that had moved on. By the time the Roman Republic began to cast its long shadow across the Mediterranean, Sparta was a politically insignificant entity, though its name still carried a legendary cachet. The Romans, with their own deep respect for discipline and austere virtue, were fascinated by this living museum of military idealism. They granted Sparta the status of a free city within their growing empire, not out of fear, but out of a kind of historical sentimentality. Roman tourists and dignitaries, including powerful men like Cicero, would visit Sparta to witness the strange customs they had read about, the austere meals, the athletic drills, the rituals of the agoge. What they saw was often a performance, a self-conscious reenactment put on for their benefit. The once organic, all-encompassing way of life had become a show, a curated exhibit of a glorious past, maintained for the admiration and curiosity of outsiders. The old institutions persisted, but as hollow shells, their original meaning drained by time and necessity. Young men still underwent a form of training, but it was more a rigorous coming-of-age ceremony than the state-forging furnace of the classical agoge. The Syssitia still met, but the fierce equality of the common mess was gone, replaced by social gatherings that likely bore little resemblance to the sparse, bonding meals of Leonidas's time. The dual kingship had long since been abolished. The city was governed by ordinary municipal officials, its laws no longer the divine retra, but local ordinances under the ultimate authority of Rome. The fierce, terrifying warriors were gone. In their place were provincial gentlemen who took pride in a distant, sanitized heritage. The clatter of the phalanx was replaced by the quiet hum of a small town living on its reputation. Even the landscape itself seemed to settle into a softer, quieter era. The Eurotas River still flowed, but the tension that once crackled in the air, the fear of Helot revolt, the rigid daily drills, the preparing for the next war had dissipated. The mountains stood as ever, but they no longer watched over a society of iron. Vineyards and olive groves flourished where training grounds once lay. The stories of Thermopylae and the laws of Lycurgus were told not as living doctrine, but as history, as poetry, as moral fables for Roman schoolchildren. Sparta had become an idea, a symbol invoked by philosophers and orators when they wished to speak of discipline, sacrifice, or the dangers of too much luxury. The reality had receded, leaving behind the powerful, simplified myth. In the quiet of this long dusk, one can imagine an old Spartan, his family claiming descent from the peers of Leonidas, walking along the riverbank in the evening. He might point out to his son, or perhaps to a visiting Roman writer, the places where things once happened, where the boys' herds used to train, where the cryptia would gather in shadow. His words would be tinged with pride, but also with the soft, inevitable melancholy that accompanies the end of things. The world had changed in ways the lawgiver could never have imagined, and the perfect, closed system he designed could not adapt. It could only persist, diminished and fossilized, a beautiful, complicated dream preserved in the amber of time. And so, the story of Sparta does not end with a dramatic collapse, but with a long, gentle fading, like the last note of a song held until it blends with the silence. The city endured, but the unique civilization, the society that placed the community above the individual, that worshipped discipline as a divine mandate, that produced warriors of legendary resolve, had run its course. What remained was an echo, a whisper of bronze and a flash of crimson cloth in the historical memory. The river murmured on, the stars wheeled above the dark profile of Taygetus, and the stones of the fallen city, though inhabited, slept the deep sleep of history, their great, tumultuous dream of order finally at rest. And so, as the final echoes of Spartan marches fade into the whisper of the Eurotas River and the eternal silence of the mountain passes, we return from that world of bronze and iron to the quiet of our own. The Spartan dream of perfect, unwavering order now sleeps deep within the soil of history, a powerful reminder of what humans can build and what can be lost when an ideal is pursued above all else. Their legacy endures not as a model to be revived, but as a haunting, fascinating lesson in discipline, sacrifice, and the inevitable complexity of human societies. We leave them there in the soft dusk of Laconia, their story complete, their long watch finally over. Thank you for allowing me to guide you through these ancient echoes tonight. I hope this journey into the deep past has helped calm your mind and soothe your spirit. If you enjoyed drifting through history, please like and subscribe to support our channel, where every story is a lullaby for the curious mind. Now, let go of the distant past, settle into your own peace, and sleep well.